Hello and welcome to today's ArchivesDirect information session. My name is Carissa Smith and I am the product manager for DSpace Direct and DuraCloud, two fully hosted and managed services from the DuraSpace not-for-profit organization. Today I'm joined by Courtney Muma and Sarah Romke from Artifactual Systems. Courtney is the lead of US and international community development, and Sarah is a systems archivist at Artifactual. Both Courtney and Sarah are dual master's degree holders in archival and information and library and information studies. My goodness, I can't get that out. Today we will all be discussing the newest service our two organizations have partnered to offer called ArchivesDirect. So if you weren't planning on watching a webinar about that, you're in the wrong place. Some general housekeeping items before we begin today. As you've probably already noticed, your audio for today's call is disabled, but we really highly encourage submission of questions or comments through the chat feature, which is located in the bottom left of your screen. Simply type in the text box and click the conversation bubble to send either, again, a question or a comment. For today's agenda, I plan to give an overview of the ArchivesDirect service, and then Courtney will present on the pilot project that we completed, the use cases that were tested as part of the pilot project, and talk in much more detail about the functionality of the ArchivesDirect service itself. I'll go through some screenshots of the dashboard. We will certainly be sure to reserve time at the end for all the questions that come through the chat, so please feel free to insert them as Courtney and I are presenting today, or if you feel more comfortable, you can hold them till the end of the session, and again, we'll be sure to address all of the questions by one. All right, so I think that's all of the housekeeping and agenda items for today. I will get my portion of the presentation started, assuming I can find the slide. There we go. So I thought I'd start at the very kind of high level and describe exactly what ArchivesDirect is. It is a hosted service from the DuraSpace organization, but the support, training, and consulting of the service is provided by Artifactual Systems. So it's a service that is provided in partnership between two organizations. And from a technical perspective, ArchivesDirect is the integration of the Archivematica software and the DuraCloud software, all included in one hosted service that we call ArchivesDirect. The takeaway of combining the two open source projects, Archivematica and DuraCloud, is that you really get a nice, fully featured service that enables creating standard-based digital preservation packages that are then stored in a secure long-term cloud-based storage environment. So it's a fully featured hosted service. Sorry, I'm fumbling to try to find my slide button. So a little bit of the background about the service itself and how it came to be. In the spring of last year, discussions began between Artifactual and DuraSpace regarding integrating Archivematica and DuraCloud and what that might look like. And then that quickly progressed into a first phase pilot in the summer and fall of this past year in 2014, really testing out functionality of the integration of the two systems. That then proceeded into phase 2 testing and regarding scalability of the ArchivesDirect service in the winter of last year and early this year. And then just a little over a month ago, we launched a beta version to the public of ArchivesDirect. So it's been a very quick turnaround and a very fruitful partnership between DuraSpace and Artifactual in order to enable the ArchivesDirect service. Delving down a little bit further into more detail here, I thought I would cover some of the benefits of the ArchivesDirect service. So because it is a truly hosted and fully managed service, of course it enables quick startup. There's no software that needs to be installed locally. There's no hardware that needs to be procured. All of that is managed and maintained as part of the hosted service, as part of ArchivesDirect. So it truly is a quick startup in comparison to installing the software locally. As I alluded to in the previous slide, ArchivesDirect includes the automatic content preservation component with DuraCloud as part of the service offering, which is again, a really nice feature of a hosted service in that not only is it allowing you to process your content, it also includes the preservation and the storage component for that content as well. So you don't have to, again, procure any local servers or any other additional hardware for storing your content. Because it is a hosted service, and it is all web-based, you have access to your content at any point in time, assuming, again, that you have an internet connection. It's all web-based. There are dashboards in order to upload your content, process your content, and then view the archival information packages that are generated as part of the ArchivesDirect service. And again, that is all web-based and available through a web-based dashboard. Moving along on the slide here, both Archivematica and DuraCloud are open source systems and adhere to open standards. So openness is certainly part of the benefits of using the ArchivesDirect services compared to some other services on the market. I think related to being open and transparent about the content and the software that's being run, you, the customer or the user of the ArchivesDirect service, have complete control of your content from various perspectives. From, I think, a business service level agreement perspective, you remain the owner of the content. You're not giving up any sort of ownership or control of your data as part of using this hosted service. And then from a more physical standpoint, you have complete control of uploading your content, making decisions around how it's processed through ArchivesDirect, and then have direct access to the content as it's stored in DuraCloud as part of the preservation storage. So there's not any point in time that you don't have access or the ability to make decisions on your content. As I've mentioned, Archivematica and DuraCloud are two open source software programs, and both of them have associated open source communities of users around the software. So one of the great benefits of using the ArchivesDirect service is that you get entree into that community of users who are already having discussions around topics that would relate to archives and preservation and processing content. So not only are you subscribing to a service, but you automatically get entered into the open source community of users and can rely on them for participating in the ongoing discussions around topics related to this community. DuraSpace is a not-for-profit organization, as I mentioned, and one of our core tenets is that we provide open systems, proponents of open access and open data, etc. And as I've mentioned, both Archivematica and DuraCloud, and therefore ArchivesDirect, is running open source software. So you don't have to worry as a customer of the ArchivesDirect service around being locked into to us as a vendor. Locking in your content to the system itself. There is no proprietary software that's being run. Your content is not being packaged in any sort of proprietary manner. You always have access to it in the interface, so you don't have to worry about any sort of lock-in, either from a content perspective or from a vendor perspective. The ArchivesDirect service, and this is the part that I find very interesting, allows you to customize your workflows or your processes to match your local needs, whether they be around the content specifically or your local workflows. The interface itself is entirely customizable, and Courtney will talk in much more detail about that. So those are just some really kind of high-level benefits of the ArchivesDirect service that I wanted to touch on. And as I mentioned, Courtney will go into quite a bit more detail in just a moment. Delving into, again, some of the features, more technical, hands-on features. As I've mentioned now a couple different times, ArchivesDirect is fully hosted. So it doesn't require you, the customer, to procure any software or hardware locally or maintain any servers, etc. The service is entirely web-based. So again, all you need is a browser and an internet connection in order to interact with ArchivesDirect. The service provides easy tools for transferring your content into DuraCloud, into ArchivesDirect, and the Artifactual team also provides training around assisting you getting your content into the service as well. The service is content agnostic, so you certainly can add any sorts of files and process them through the system. You don't have to worry about packaging things a certain way or certain file types not being accepted. You can process and store any types of files in ArchivesDirect. As I've mentioned, ArchivesDirect is the integration of Archivematica and DuraCloud. Archivematica on the front end that handles all of the processing and configuration of your files. And so I wanted to talk about some specific features of the Archivematica front end piece. And again, Courtney will go into much more detail there. But the workflows that you can enable can be very highly customized. You can make a lot of decisions around how you want your content to be processed through the Archivematica software. And then once you've made those decisions, you can essentially save them as pre-configurations and continue to run them. And again, that's a feature that I find absolutely fantastic. Archivematica enables workflows that are based on the OAS framework and has a laundry list of preservation microservices that you can decide to turn on within the Archivematica dashboard. Of course, there's file normalization as part of that process available as well, and it generates standards compliant metadata in premise METs and also enables the Bagot Library of Congress format as well. On the back end is the DuraCloud component for preservation storage, and I wanted to touch on just a few specific features of that component of ArchivesDirect as well. So not only do you get preservation storage, but it is indeed replicated. So you have your content and two copies of your content stored in two different locations, which for many checks the box on certain best practices or preservation policies that you're trying to meet. Also, DuraCloud does regular integrity checks of your preservation content. So again, it's another preservation best practice kind of box that you can check with the ArchivesDirect service. And as I've mentioned, you can download content from that interface at any point in time. You always have access to it. You can download it back to your local institution at any point in time, either for a disaster recovery scenario or just a content restore, or simply just to audit the content that's being stored in your preservation area of your ArchivesDirect account. So inevitably, the question comes up, how much does this service cost? So I thought I'd touch briefly on the subscription plans that are available. We have one annual standard subscription that includes all of the features and benefits that I've mentioned, of course, specifically one ArchivesDirect instance, 1 full terabyte of preservation storage, 1 introductory training session, familiarizing you with the ArchivesDirect interface, how to make decisions around what preservation microservices you'd like to run, etc. And what I think is worth its weight in gold is the 6 hours of customized training support and consulting that's provided by the Artifactual Systems folks. That is individual training. That's not you sitting in a webinar with 10 other customers. That's one-on-one talking about your use case and your needs and your content needs in particular, and mapping those to your ArchivesDirect usage. So it really helps you get started using the subscription. As I've mentioned, that subscription is on an annual term, and the cost for that is $11,900. We've priced this subscription plan competitively. If you're not quite ready to commit to an annual subscription to ArchivesDirect, or just from a local perspective, aren't at the point where you need to run the service for a year, we also have the Digital Preservation Assessment Package available, which is for a 3-month term for $4,500. And as you can see on the screen, it includes almost all of the same things as the standard plan, a little less storage, of course, 250 gigabytes, an introductory training session. But I think the big difference there is you get 10 hours of customized support and consulting. The goal of the Digital Preservation Assessment Package is to help you become ready to preserve your content. So it's really like hiring an expert consultant to assist you in looking at your content, looking at your local workflows or enabling local workflows, putting together some policies and procedures. So it's a really helpful package. And again, it's a 3-month term for those who are not quite ready to commit to an annual subscription to ArchivesDirect. And of course, as you begin to think about taking advantage of ArchivesDirect, you may question, what if I need more storage? What if I need additional processing capabilities? And of course, those are available with ArchivesDirect. If you need additional storage, it's priced at $1,000 per terabyte, and that again is on an annual basis, so it goes in line with your with a standard subscription. And that 1 terabyte includes replicated storage, as I've mentioned in a previous slide. The DuraCloud component of ArchivesDirect stores content in Amazon S3 and Amazon Glacier on your behalf. So that's included in that storage cost. If you need additional processing pipelines, and again, Courtney will talk about some use cases where this might be of interest. We have those priced per month or annually, depending on what your needs are. And again, that's access to one additional Archivematica processing pipeline if you need to run several at the same time because you have certain content needs or certain collections of content, etc. Those are also available and can be recommended as part of that initial consultation and setup. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Courtney, who's going to talk in quite a bit more detail about the pilot project that we conducted, the use cases that were tested, and talk in much more detail about the functionality of the ArchivesDirect service in particular. So Courtney?
Hello. Thank you so much, Carissa. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. So I'm going to talk about our pilot project that led to the launch of ArchivesDirect. And as Carissa explained, this was largely to identify exactly what the service needs would be, the scope of the project, in that we had to decide and discover how much work we needed to do to get the two systems working well together in a way that was usable for people who would use the system going forward. We had 9 fantastic volunteer partners. We had Berea, Huntington, Illinois Wesleyan, Kansas State, North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources, Pepperdine, Phillips, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and the University of Washington. And what we did is that myself and Sarah Romke, we split up the partners and helped them with their pilots. And essentially, what we did with them is the same kind of thing that we would do with any new partners who decide to use ArchivesDirect, as Krista described in our customized consulting, training, and support. So where we offer training and then we help figure out which workflows you need for your particular content in your institution. So where we started with each of our pilot partners was here. What types of digital content do you have? So most of our partners had a variety of content, but they all had some born digital. Some of the born digital kinds of materials we had were government and university records, things like student artwork in universities, theses and dissertations. And these were a lot of different formats. They were audiovisual, textual, geospatial, websites, presentations, images, databases, and some others that I didn't list here. We also had a lot of digitized materials, especially from the university libraries. We had digitized books, newspapers, many, many images, and a lot of video that was digitized locally, but also some video from vendors. Some of these digitized projects had access copies that had already been made alongside the preservation copies, and some did not. And some of them also had metadata, which leads us into our next bullet here. Another type of digital content we had that Archivematica can handle using ArchivesDirect is submission documentation and metadata. And submission documentation, if you're not familiar with the term, refers to things like permission forms, accession records, donor forms, maybe a picture of digital media. So if you have a video cassette that you've digitized and you want to keep a photograph of that original cassette from which the digital copy was made, then you might keep a picture of that digital media. The idea of submission documentation is that it's content that's about the content to be preserved, but not necessarily part of the package itself. And additionally, we had descriptive metadata that some of which came from other systems. And then there's also descriptive metadata that people wanted to include while they were running things through ArchivesDirect. So we had to first identify what types of content existed, and then we had to figure out where it was in the institution. So many of our institutions had their content stored locally, and that was one of their main problems, was that they just had one copy on a LAN or some other form of storage locally in their institution, and it wasn't backed up anywhere, and it wasn't getting integrity checks. So it wasn't truly preserved. They also had it in other systems. For instance, several of our pilot partners had it in Content DM, they had content in DSpace instances, and many of them already had content in DuraCloud, but they wanted it to have a bit more robust preservation services applied to it before stored in DuraCloud. Some of them had their content on detached media. So the detached media was things like detached drives that may have come from vendors, but they also may have come from donors. And then some of our users had packaged content, and this can be many things. In some cases, it was bagged using the Library of Congress Baggett specification. Some of it was forensic images that they'd created using systems like BitCurator. And some of the content was zipped or packaged using the tarball. So what we did is after we had identified what the content was, where it was, and how much of it we had to deal with, we had to start asking some questions of the content. And these questions are very important because Archivematica enables the user to make decisions in the course of processing in the Archivematica dashboard. And as Carissa mentioned earlier, it also allows the user to pre-configure these decisions that they make. So some of the questions that we would ask are, is there descriptive metadata included? If there is, does it need to be preserved alongside the preservation materials? If it doesn't already exist, do we need to add it in the course of processing in Archivematica? And are the objects that have the descriptive metadata complex or simple objects? Again, is there submission documentation, this idea I discussed a little bit in the last slide? Are there already access copies? Do you need to make access copies using ArchivesDirect? And then if you do have them or need to make them, where do you want to send them or store them? So do you want to send them to another system, or do you want to store them somewhere and then come back to them later when you're ready to send them to some access system? Do you want to generate preservation copies, or have you already made them or had a vendor make them? And then same idea for service masters. So many of our institutions had their vendors, or locally they would make service masters from which they would generate their preservation and access copies. And if they have those, the ArchivesDirect system can recognize those. We also wanted to ask things like, is the directory structure of this content important? So that's that question of original order. Do you want to keep, if you have your content packaged, do you want to keep the package and the content that ArchivesDirect would unpack from that package? Or do you just want to keep one or the other, so just the package or just the content or both? Do you want to include rights information? ArchivesDirect uses premise, rights, and restrictions, and you can enter those in the dashboard interface. So if you do want to include that, you have to have a little planning ahead of time to get ready to enter that information as you're processing through the system. Is your content bagged? Is it in DSpace? Is it a forensic image? Because these are all different kinds of workflows in ArchivesDirect. How large should the archival packages be? So if you're familiar with OAIS, this refers to decisions that you might want to make about the size of AIPs that you store. And this is just to control how long it might take for you to pull down your archival packages from DuraCloud if you wanted to access them in the future. So you want to do some thinking about how large you want those to be, and that would impact how large your content transfers are. And then finally, will my archival packages have a one-to-one relationship with my transferred digital content? You can do something in ArchivesDirect that allows you to do some arrangement where you can actually arrange transferred content into multiple packages that then become multiple archival packages that you can then store, or you can combine multiple transfers into one archival package. So some of our workflow examples, and again, we had 9 partners and each of them had several different workflows. So these are just some examples that stood out. Phillips Academy had some student art videos with permission forms. Those permission forms were, of course, submission documentation that we would include. And they also had originals from the students, but the students had also given them some access copies that they had already made. So there are ways to configure things in Archivematica where the system actually recognizes that those permission forms are submission documentation and not part of the content to be preserved. And then the access copies can be recognized as such as well and be sent to either an access system or stored somewhere. North Carolina had born digital government records, many of which had descriptive metadata already from another system. And it was also important to them that they capture the original order of those born digital records. And we can do that in Archivematica and in ArchivesDirect using a directory printer. We have a microservice that asks you whether you want to get a directory print, basically. And then finally, Kansas State had their EPCs and dissertations, which were simple and complex objects, depending on what they were dealing with. And they had metadata already from another system. They also had service masters that they had to deal with, from which their preservation and access copies would be generated. So now I'm going to get into specifically how we would take those decisions and do our processing in Archivematica. So the first part, the first thing to do is that we would take our content once we'd ask all these questions of it and arranged any kind of folders that we had to set up beforehand, which we'll have a follow-up webinar soon, and we'll tell you about that at the end, in which Sarah Romkey and myself will describe to you how you actually set up folders for transfers into Archivematica in great detail. But in general, Archivematica just needs content in a folder. It can just be one file in a folder. It just has to be in a folder unless, of course, it's a bagged package, and that can be a zipped bag or not. You have to prepare, if you have metadata from another system that you want to include, you would have to prepare that metadata CSV for either simple or complex objects. We have directions for that are in our public community documentation, and that's, of course, something else we would help you learn how to do and run tests with you when we were doing our consulting part of your partnership. You would prepare any submission documentation by simply putting it in a subfolder of your transfer folder, and that subfolder is called submission documentation. We would identify any of those pre-made access preservation and service copies that I discussed so that we could configure them in a way in your transfer package that Archivematica recognized them. Then we would decide on the right workflow. Is this a standard workflow, which the bulk of transfers through Archivematica are standard workflows? Is it from DSpace? We have a specific DSpace workflow. Is it a forensic image? We have a workflow for forensic images that allows you to add metadata about the imaging process that happened outside of Archivematica, and then that gets wrapped up into your archival package mets.xml. And then also you would decide on your pre-configured settings, but we'll talk more about this soon. So I'm showing you, this is the first kind of taste of the dashboard in Archivematica. This is the transfer tab of the dashboard. You see across the top there, it says transfer, ingest, archival storage, preservation planning, access, and administration. So you see here, you've got that drop down on the left. That's the type drop down menu. And so that's where you'll actually be indicating what type of transfer this will be. And that's what I was discussing in the last slide, where is it standard transfer? Is it DSpace? Is it a bag? Is it a forensic image? Then you have an opportunity to name the transfer. You can assign an accession number here or bring in an accession number from another system that then gets wrapped into your metadata content for your package. And then you would have your transfer source locations, which are configured in your DuraCloud dashboard, available to you here. So this would be a drop-down menu. You would go to any of your transfer source locations, and then once you choose the location, you could browse within that location for the specific transfer content that you're ready to process through. Once you're all ready to go, you can set up more than one at a time. So once you browse to content, you can browse to more content in other areas. You'll end up with a list here below, and then you can click this big green button, and that begins your transfer. So you also want to decide on your workflow or your pre-configured settings. So this is what I was talking about and what Carissa alluded to earlier. Archivematica has many microservices that it runs through, and the default in Archivematica is that you are asked as a user to make decisions at several of the microservices. So this means that you have the opportunity to define your workflow. Any workflow decisions do not impact the OAIS compliance in the system. But what's really great is that you can kind of preset everything in the system to allow you to make decisions as you're processing, as you're beginning, and as you're learning the system. But then once you know what your workflow is for particular content, you can use a pre-configured setting option so that you don't have to stop at all these different points in the dashboard and make decisions. So let's go through what some of those decisions are. And a lot of these will sound very familiar because these relate to the kinds of questions that we ask you to make of your content when you're assessing your content for preservation. So here's the decisions that you can make in the dashboard on the fly or pre-configure. How and when to identify your format. So you can either identify all of the formats in your transfer content in the transfer tab of the dashboard or in the ingest tab of the dashboard. Or you can do both. And you can also choose which tool to use. Right now we have Fido as a tool and then extension. Fido uses pronom PUIDs to identify format. We want to add other tools, and that's actually fairly easy in the system to add new tools and rules to identify format. And anytime we add any new tools, we will update any ArchivesDirect user so that those tools are also available to them to choose from. Then you have to decide, this is that question I was talking about earlier about whether to extract packages. So if you have an ISO file, that's an image file, do you want to extract the content from that? And then once you extract the content from that, do you want to keep it or do you want to get rid of the ISO and just keep the content? Here's that whether you want to print directory structure or not. So that is an opportunity for you to create a text file that describes the directory structure of your content. Now, that's already available to you in your mets.xml, but if you don't want to have to parse that, if you want to have an easier way to access that directory structure, I know we have users who are using the text file to basically copy and paste to their scope and content note, for instance. Then you might want to choose this directory structure option. here's some more decisions. You can actually run a forensic tool on things that are not forensic objects. So the tool that we use in Archivematica right now is called Bulk Extractor. And what it does is it creates a bunch of reports. They're called features, and they identify private and confidential information in your content. And then that information, all of those reports are contained there for you so that you can review them. You can decide whether you want to do any arrangement. So this is what I was describing earlier when I was saying how you can have content that you break into multiple packages that eventually become multiple AIPs for storage in your archival storage, or you can combine your content into one AIP for storage. You can add Dublin Core metadata. We've just got a simple set of 15 Dublin Core elements that you can add using a template, and that's at the package level. And you can also add premise rights and restrictions at the package level. You can create access and or preservation copies, or choose not to do either one and just keep your original. Our default in Archivematica is that we do create normalized preservation copies, and all of the decisions about preservation formats are well documented and available to the entire community at large. You can describe whether you want to transcribe the contents. Right now we have rules for transcription of images, so it's OCR transcription, but we want to add transcription for audiovisual materials in the future, and we expect that probably in the next year or so. It's basically a matter of finding the right tools to apply. And then you can decide where you want to store your archival package, and if you created them, your access copies as well. And for your access copies, that can be in another system, or that can just be stored somewhere, stored into our cloud, or maybe pulled down somewhere locally. So I'm going to show you what I just described. This is where, once you had gone through several times and you were very comfortable with your workflows in the system, you would start by using the administrative tab in the dashboard and pre-configure a lot of these options. So what you see here is just the first part of the list that actually goes down quite further. But this is where you can pre-configure these dashboard decisions that we just went through so that you don't have to stop and make those decisions while you're processing. Now, if you don't want to do that, then you can still make your decisions in the dashboard. This, you see here, we're in the transfer tab. This assumes that you've already started a transfer, and it's called images here. This is the name you've given it. You see that it's been assigned a universal identifier here. This is its UUID. All of these microservice lines can be expanded, and what you'll see here is that many of these microservice lines are going to resonate for you because they are some of those decisions that I was discussing with you. So, for instance, here we see examine contents. This would be the decision point about using the forensic tool called Bulk Extractor that identifies private and confidential material. So you can either make the decision in the dashboard, or if you've pre-configured in your administrative tab to run or not run this, then Archivematica would automatically function in that way. You'll see too that there are other microservices that we do not ask questions about, and this is in order to stay OAIS compliant. So there are some things that we just must do in the system, like characterization and extraction, validation, cleaning up some names so that the system can understand them, but you always keep your originals in the METs. But you'll also see the scan for viruses and a quarantine option. So we'll always scan for viruses, but we offer this option to quarantine if you wanted to allow your virus definitions to update. And that could be pre-configured, including the length of time of that quarantine in that pre-configuration tab in administration. And some of those other decisions that we discussed, you'll see here, the identification of file format that's available to you in ingest. So you can make that decision here, or you can pre-configure it to use something like Fido, for instance. The extract packages here. If Archivematica sees that there is a package, it will ask you whether you want to extract it or not, and then whether or not you want to keep that package, unless, of course, you've pre-configured it in your administration tab. So let's go on to the ingest tab. Here I'm showing you basically this is the arrangement feature. So if you decide that you do not have a one-to-one relationship between your transferred content and what you eventually want to put in archival storage, that you actually have to do some analysis work, then you might want to do that here. And so what you do is here you see you have your originals. This means this is the content from all of your transfers that you've started in the system. And then you can name your packages over here anything you want. You can work on many packages at a time and just move content over from your originals into those new packages that will eventually then become your archival packages. And once you're ready, you can select one of those, highlight it with a red box, and go ahead and tell the system to create a SIP, that's a submission information package, and then that goes down into this regular workflow here. And so any of these lines here, were you to expand them, you would see multiple microservices below them. Essentially, the most important thing that happens during the ingest processing in the system is that normalization to preservation and access copies, and then of course the generation of the METS XML that includes your premise preservation metadata, including any Dublin Core metadata that you would add using a template available to you here, or any metadata that you added about rights and restrictions that you might have added here. So again, see, this is the arrangement panel that is collapsed. This interface up at the top is how you would bring things into that originals panel for arrangement. So once you'd made your decision about arrangement, decided to create the SIP, you would see your content, now a SIP, show up here in the ingest process. Here you'll see the normalized interface. This is where you have the opportunity to decide whether you want to make access and/or preservation copies, or whether you just want to keep the originals with all of their metadata and all the rich logs that are generated about all the work that you've done, including, for instance, if you've done any arrangement, an arrangement log. You also have a different opportunity here to use a different format identifier should you choose to do so. Again, though, you don't have to have stopping points to make these decisions. You can make these decisions once you know your workflows really well in your administrative tab of your dashboard. And then finally, once all of that is done and you've reviewed the results of your normalization and you're happy with it, then you would, of course, store your archival package. And in this case, you are storing your archival package in that Hardy DuraCloud storage. And then, of course, you have it about concurrently, you can make a decision about where to send your access copies, your dissemination information package or DIP, whether that's going to be locally or to some system that you have configured. And then, of course, if you want to search your archival storage, we have a tab here in the dashboard called Archival Storage. And this allows you to search the contents of your METS XML, so that includes your premise content in there, things like file names, original file names. And of course, you can search on UUID, you can search on accession number, that sort of thing. And you can show either the entire package or you can show files by clicking on Show Files here. There are many, many, many Archivematica workflows. What I've shown you is just the very basic set of decisions that you have to make in the system. Some other workflows that are available to you and that we would help you as part of any assessment or any partnership figure out which you need for your content. You can manage data sets and accruals over time to content. You can relate preserved content to other preserved content. So for instance, you could have some kind of system, like rendering system in one AIP, and then in the other AIP have the actual content that you want to render using that system. And then using this concept of the archival information collection, which is the AIC concept, which is from OAIS, you would be able to relate those to each other so that you would be able to understand without the system how those two AIPs relate to each other. You would also, within the dashboard, you can also view files, logs, and metadata during that arrangement procedure that I showed you. You can also view normalization reports and the results of normalization in your browser. So once normalization is complete, there's a review process that you can do that either shows you, you can look at a listing of how successful it was according to the system, but you can also look at the actual results. So as long as you have a browser viewer, you can view things like JPEGs and TIFFs that you've created. You can also view the METS XML and the premise metadata in a viewer, and you can validate it as well using the system. You can do that before you send your archival package to storage in DuraCloud. And then you can also set your own rules using the format policy registry. So we have something in the Archivematica dashboard called the format policy registry, or the FPR, and that allows you to set your own rules for many of these decision points and many of these microservices where you can decide what tool you use and what are the parameters of the TIFF that you create, or perhaps you want to make a JPEG 2000 instead of a TIFF for your preservation copy. You would set those rules there. So what are your workflows? As Carissa outlined, all of our package offer help determining your own workflows and your own needs in the system. That digital preservation assessment package really allows you to pilot the system and get the training and determine the needs and the workflows that you will need locally, and maybe even decide whether you need more than one pipeline, either temporarily or permanently, because you have some workflows that have such predictable decision points and you just need them running concurrently all the time. And with that, I'm going to offer you some ways to find out more, and we can move into question time. This website for ArchivesDirect is here, and it has a short video that shows some details of the system. And Carissa has indicated that we're recording today, so this webinar will be available to you as well. We have upcoming webinars. The first that's coming is on April 9th. There's an Archivematica specific webinar, so if you want more details and a demonstration of how to use the Archivematica system independently of the ArchivesDirect service, go ahead and attend that on April 9th, and there's information there about where to register. And then we have a great series of ArchivesDirect webinars, May 14th and then the 26th. The first is a lot more detail about preparing your content, and then the second on the 26th is actually running that content through the system. So a very detailed look at taking some use cases that we discussed in the first webinar and then applying those and seeing them go through the system. And then there's Carissa's and my own email, so feel free to reach out to us if you would like to. We'd be happy to answer questions and follow up in any way we can. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Carissa.
Thank you very much, Courtney. We've had a few questions come in through the chat, and I would encourage anybody who has outstanding questions to start adding them to the chat feature again, on the left-hand side of your screen. I just wanted to voice a couple of the questions that have come in, and Sarah did a really great job of answering them in the chat. Back when Courtney was talking about configuring multiple workflows, Kristen had a question about setting up multiple pre-configuration settings, and if you would need multiple pipelines, etc., if you wanted to have different configurations for different collections. So Sarah discussed a response to that to have multiple pre-configurations, you could have different pipelines running simultaneously, so one pipeline for each configuration. Or you could reset the processing configuration in just one pipeline to match the collections that you're processing. That question then spurred an additional observation that may be a bit painful for some folks if you have multiple collections with ongoing accessions. So Sarah then followed up with, there's another workaround, which is to include an XML file that describes the processing configuration with each transfer, and added the observation that type of granularity of assessing needs and fitting the ArchivesDirect service to meet your needs is something that would be determined as part of the training consultation setup of the account, the ArchivesDirect account at the very beginning. So let's see, the next question came from Peter, and that was regarding the fact that all of their digital files sit in a dark archive. Most of them have mods records in Fedora. So he was wondering, how would the digital objects be combined with the metadata for preservation through ArchivesDirect in that instance? Sarah then followed up and said that you could preserve the metadata files by placing them in a specific folder called metadata in your transfer. And let's see, the next question that came in, let me make sure I'm addressing all these in the proper order. And as they come in, they move my screen. Richie asked if any of our pilot sites shared collections with an aggregator, such as DPLA or an intermediary hub. Was Archivematica part of that process? So I'll let Courtney address that question because it deals with the pilot.
So thank you. So Richie, so no, none of our pilot partners shared any of their collections with an aggregator like DPLA. In fact, for many of our pilots, they were still approaching the process, deciding whether they wanted to use ArchivesDirect to generate their access copies at all. So some of them did generate access copies, but in most cases, they decided to store them somewhere in their DuraCloud or locally, and then go ahead and make a decision later about what access system they wanted to share with. So if that doesn't answer your question, please follow up in chat here. But hopefully that does answer your question. And Krista, I can go ahead and move on to the next one to Danielle and Jamie from Power 2. Hello, Danielle and Jamie. They asked if there is a cost associated with downloading content, since Amazon typically charges for data retrieval. And actually now I have to hand that back to you, Krista, because you're the representative for Cloud. So I'll let you describe that process a little bit.
Absolutely. So one of the benefits of DuraCloud as part of the ArchivesDirect service is that we understand your needs to download your content for disaster recovery or just local content restores. So built into the subscription is an assumption for some amount of downloading of your content equal to the amount that you're storing. So for instance, if you have subscribed for 1 terabyte of storage, that includes 1 terabyte of downloads on an annual basis. Because certainly we understand it. And for this particular community, the need to be able to do that and predict the cost. If you had a use case around needing to download your content on a much more frequent basis, we would work with you to budget what that would look like. And again, that would be downloading your entire corpus of content, you know, more than once a year, which I will say in my 5 years of running DuraCloud, we haven't seen that use case, but I'm sure there could be one out there. But yes, we would work with you if you had that use case in mind. But for the most, there's downloads built in, and we would not pass along cost at that point. And again, I'll echo our responses that we're verbalizing here. For other questions or aren't as clear as you'd like them to be, please feel free to ask for clarification in the chat. Carl asked another. I think Courtney jumped in.
Carl,
Okay.
I can take this. Yeah, hi. So Carl asks, will development of this integrated system roughly mirror that of Archivematica and DuraCloud each? So will ArchivesDirect users enjoy all the same updates and or new features? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. That's one of the great things about the hosted service that we're so excited about, is it gives us the opportunity to, in one fell swoop, offer updates very easily to many users. So anytime we have system updates that are security fixes or bug updates or a next version, then you will get that update. And additionally, you will also get a brief training on those features. So that will be not one-on-one like the regular consulting, but it will be an opportunity to join something like this, a webinar, where whenever we do an update, you'll be able to be educated about all of the new features or updates that have been included in your update so that you're never behind what the system is doing. And then Danielle and Jamie had a question about, is it possible to use an XML file instead of a CSV file when preparing for the metadata transfer? It is possible, but we don't have that workflow documented yet. So it would just be a matter of documenting that workflow. I think it has to do, and Sarah, hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it has to do with a bit on the development end of things, taking that XML file and doing a bit of transformation before using it. So the CSV file in general is the best way to go. We would have to do some documentation around using XML instead. We have done that on the back end with some clients just to help them move forward with their content. And I don't see, oh, maybe I need to scroll. Okay, there's another one. Let's see. Nancy, you have a question. Can you tell us how some of your pilot partners plan to provide access? Um, and you're asking if any plan to use the Atom component for access. That's a really great question. Um, so we did have one institution during the pilot, as Sarah indicated in her answer, who was interested in using Atom, and we did run tests, and it all worked. The Atom, however, is not hosted in DuraCloud. That's the important thing to point out. Atom is something that would be either hosted or something that you had locally, and then all the functionality in ArchivesDirect does still allow you, though, to update, to upload your access copies and some of that metXML content that mirrors the archival package content into that Atom access system. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Atom is referring to access to memory, which is the access and content management system that also open source that Artifactual makes, and that is always developed concurrently with Archivematica. So they are two separate systems, but they're always developed concurrently, so they are always integrated. And it looks like from Loyola, we have a question about what type of reporting is available for collections that have been processed through ArchivesDirect. I think I'm going to let Krissa maybe take this one to talk about available from DuraCloud. That really
Sure.
what's available in Archivematica.
Right. So any of the AIPs that are generated and then stored in DuraCloud are then available in the DuraCloud dashboard, of course, where not only are integrity checks run on a regular basis, but also general storage reports on the content. So you get a good snapshot of all of the storage capacity that you're using within the interface. You get access to the health check reports that are being run. Not that that would matter for the AIP packages themselves, but if you were storing other types of content in DuraCloud, it gives you reports that break out the MIME types for the files that are being stored. And then you also see a history of your content storage in DuraCloud as well. So you can see that you've added X number of files per month or per week, etc. I don't know if there was any particular type of metrics that you were hoping to have reported about the processing through ArchivesDirect, but those are the types of things that DuraCloud reports, and again, it's on the storage side of the spectrum. Any other questions? We have just a few minutes left in our hour today, and Courtney and Sarah would be very happy to address any other outstanding questions that you have. And while I pause just a moment as folks gather their thoughts, I will underscore the fact that today's session is being recorded. I will be posting that somewhere. I haven't determined whether it'll be on YouTube or SlideShare. I will be sending the link to the recording to everybody who registered for today's session, so you'll have direct access to it as soon as it's available. And I'll also be sending the links on the slides that are appearing in front of you, so you can register for the upcoming Archivematica webinar or the ArchivesDirect webinar series as well, so you don't have to jot that down. We'll be sending out those links after today's session as well. Right, I see one participant typing, which may or may not be a question. Nope, not a question. So I think I will wrap up there. Thank you all for your attendance and the fantastic questions today. I'd like to thank Courtney and Sarah for taking the time to answer the questions and walk through a really great overview of ArchivesDirect. And again, if you have any additional questions or comments about the ArchivesDirect service, feel free to reach out to Courtney or myself directly, fill out the form on the archivesdirect.org website. Any way that you'd like to communicate us, we would be more than happy to answer any outstanding questions in the near future. Again, thank you all for your time today, and I will be in touch with the recording when it's available later this week. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, everyone.
Thank you so much, Krissa, and thanks again to everyone. Take care.